Good evening. It's now 6 o'clock. I'm handing over to Dr. Janke Ment. Dr. Janke, over to you.
Thank you so much, Janine. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to part 2 of our webinar series called Life After ComServe. Today's talk is about securing your next step in private and public, and what steps you can take from your side in order to find that job, get that job, secure that job, and start that job. So I'm going to hand you over to our first speaker, who is Dr. Peters. Dr. Shrikant Peters. Dr. Peters will specifically be talking about how to secure your post within the public sector of South Africa. Dr. Peters is a public health physician with his undergraduate and specialist training completed at UCT. He also has a BA degree in politics, philosophy, and economics from the University of South Africa. As a medical manager based at Groote Schuur Hospital, he has overseen perioperative, emergency, transplant, and critical services. He is responsible for operational and corporate management with transversal responsibilities in infection control, quality improvement, and electronic health record integration at the hospital. He is also a council member of the Eastern, Central, and Southern Africa Colleges of Public Health, and he chairs the Medical Management Subcommittee, which is with responsibility for implementing training programs for doctors in medical management. Thank you for giving us a bit of your precious time, Doctor.
Great, thank you very much. Just confirming you can see me?
Yes, we can see you.
Great, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm going to just share my screen. Great, can you see that?
It's coming up now. Just full screen. And yeah, ready. Thank you.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much for the introduction, and welcome everyone to the session. Thank you very much for our colleagues at UDASA and SAMA for hosting the session. So we've entitled it Life After Community Service, looking at CVs, Z83s, and interview tips. I'll be speaking to primarily the public sector view and the view of a younger millennial. And we, I think, feel our privilege at this point in time compared to the pressures that junior doctors have to face in the working environment and the career pathing process. So I'm going to take off my camera for the rest of the session. But yeah, we'll have questions after the presentations. So we're at 2025. We've all come through a pandemic. Some of us as students, some of us as practitioners already, and some of us as managers. We've been through ups and downs in the life of the country over the last 30 years of democracy. And why career pathing of junior doctors is becoming such an important discussion to have is the severe selection pressures to get into training programs in the public sector of the country. And of course, the South African state sector is the only place where we can actually graduate specialists currently. I say this is a very timeless presentation because tomorrow the National Department of Health are hosting a ministerial advisory committee meeting on human resources management for the country. At that meeting will be discussed community service itself, commuted overtime and the sustainability thereof, the ability of doctors to do RWOPs, as well as the sustainability of rural allowance. So we understand that the state sector is under severe financial pressure, and obviously our junior doctors experience that as severe pressure to get into posts. So in a highly competitive environment, and for an environment that we were not trained for, especially the competitive interview process, We've put together some slides, but mostly tips and not tricks, a strategy to get into the shortlisting process, to write your CV and Z83, to get that interview, and then to get more than a cursory glance of your paperwork and what is essentially yourself, in a very intricate process to analyzing your ability to do a job. So, yes, I think we all started in medical school and we all understand, basic medicine. The difficulty with the typical medical career is that we understand medicine, right? If you have to put yourself in the shoes of the person interviewing you, which is what is very important to do every time you apply for a job, is to think, what would differentiate me for this job compared to the 300 other people that have applied? And I don't use that as hyperbole. Unfortunately, for every single medical officer post that we are getting applying to us at my hospital, we have at least 100 people applying. And these are not 100 people who are taking their chances without any postgraduate qualifications previously. These are all 100 qualified medically trained doctors who are looking for basic medical officer posts. And so the typical career that you would see of someone who is in basic sciences, their clinical clerkship, graduating on to being a safe practitioner as an intern, where we're really seeing a breakdown is after that level of apprenticeship. Starting in internship, I know that we're seeing people who are not necessarily getting their first choices in internship, but for my generation of doctors graduating in 2010, our biggest concern was whether we would get placed in a part of the country that we were happy to go to. Whereas increasingly, people are not certain if they're going to get any posts in internship or community service. And really previously, where my generation of doctors saw apprenticeship in internship and community service as the end of our state obligation, increasingly the end of your community service is synonymous with the end of the state's obligation to employ you, right? Once you're into a medical officer post, it's not a guarantee anymore that you're going to walk into a paid medical officer post for the Department of Health from community service, much less a training post as a registrar. And so I put this down just because this was the path I followed in public health. Within public health as a specialty, I think the differentiator was that we always had a very finite number of posts and a very highly competitive system to get into the registrar training posts. I can tell you from supervising interviews in the clinical spaces, these same pressures have been introduced. So whereas previously we would do an interview barrage of about 20 candidates who were all appointable, all with their Part 1s, all with their diplomas, it would then just be a matter of time that all of those candidates would be accepted into the program over a 6-month period, right? And that was the sum total of people who had achieved their fellowship Part 1 exams to enable them to apply for the posts. Now, Part 1 exams even sufficient to differentiate you to the point of getting you into an interview. There is a significant amount of clinical experience required by all clinical departments: anesthesia, surgery, medicine, emergency center, all the surgical and medical disciplines that are required to get you into a shortlisting criteria. And you'll see that as you apply for your posts. So it does mean that there's a sandwich created of people graduating medical school in increasing numbers from increasing numbers of medical schools, as well as a decreasing pool, or hopefully not decreasing anymore, of contracted specialist training posts, really putting the squeeze on that middle layer of medical officers and community service doctors. So we've seen that. So coming out of COVID, I mean, going into COVID, we felt it, but really coming out of what was a highly contracted service that was first overtaken by COVID and then crunched out by the budget constraints of 2020 to 2023. About 10% of facility operating budgets were cut. And so at Groote Hospital, we lost 300 million rands. Our colleagues down the road at Red Cross lost 31 million rands. So you can imagine of that 300, 100 million rands was spent on goods and services, and 200 million rands worth of posts were simply no longer filled when registrars, when consultants, and when medical officers left the service. I say that it's been a very difficult period to manage. We no longer have a block advert system for people that might have interviewed for places in the Western Cape government. You'll note that those block adverts don't come out anymore. Adverts come out every once in a while in the newspapers and online on the Western Cape government platform and other provincial platforms. You have to keep a consistent eye on adverts that are placed in the newspapers and online. But what's fundamental is keeping your CV and a copy of your Z83 with the department of your choosing, both the head of department and their secretary, to make sure that when a post is advertised, they are aware to notify you to actually put in your formal application. So I say that there are some green shoots. So yes, we have gone through a period where we have had budget constraints loaded against us. But if you have gotten a chance, doctors are increasingly looking at finances these days, both personal as well as national. Take a read of the medium-term budget statement that was published from Parliament just yesterday. And in it, it documents increases to funding of the education and health departments in the country. And so, yes, I think there are reasons to be hopeful that some of the posts that were frozen in the last 2 years will become available. But again, that's just the tip of the iceberg of the demand for healthcare posts in the public sector, from training posts to basic bottom-of-the-line medical officer posts that are required for the experience generated to get into a shortlisting for a registrarship. So you do need to make sure that you're ready. You do need to make sure that your paperwork is available, and we're going to go through some of those things that you can do to be ready when the time comes. One of the big differentiators we're seeing across the board in all clinical specialties is the ability to lead and the ability to understand clinical governance. And it's not something that we've actually been taught very well at an undergraduate level or a postgraduate level. Leadership of self, conflict resolution skills, ability to manage a ward, ability to manage a team, ability to manage a multidisciplinary team is coming to the fore. Being a chief rep for your intern group, being involved with facility management or senior clinicians, being able to do some form of research or being aware of research skills and knowledge are coming to the fore as those kinds of things that can differentiate candidates who stand out in the shortlisting and the interview process. So in public health, it's quite easy. We can list the competencies that we require of our graduates, and most medical doctors don't have those as yet. And so it's a specific issue moving into the non-clinical realm. But once you start knocking on those clinical specialty doors, it's assumed that you're not going to kill patients. It's assumed that you are excellent in your delivery of clinical care based on the years of experience it took you to get shortlisted for a program, based on your holding of various diplomas, part ones, intermediates. So that gets your foot in the door. The fact that you have a detailed CV that starts most recently and works its way backwards very clearly stipulates what you have done, and is linked to a series of good references from senior colleagues, clinicians, and managers. But ultimately, you need to start demonstrating what else you've done. it's not enough to save patient lives these days, unfortunately. So it's clinical governance that really comes to the fore in developing leaders in the space, which is what future specialists aim to be. And we've looked a lot at clinical governance, and we're looking at this from the Western Cape Government Department of Health, but we're also looking at this as medical managers in facilities across the country. So if you didn't know, in most facilities across the country, there will be a medical manager on your panel, together with a senior clinician, as well as a human resources representative, which is why people might be very surprised to learn that a lot of the questions asked in your interviews are not necessarily clinical related to the specialty that you're interviewing for. We'll get into the general pattern of questions that get asked at interviews a little bit later. And so ultimately, we want to make sure, as medical managers that are responsible for the entire system, governance, information, medicines, human resources, and finance and service delivery, we want to know that the people that we're appointing into the system can work together in teams, can actually deliver high quality care to patients that is objectively good. You have to obviously be able to know the guidelines and algorithms from your clinical specialty, especially of the university and center that you're applying to. When you answer a clinical question, you better be using an algorithm that is known to the clinician on the panel who's asking you the question. I think a big concern we have in the current system, where we're getting a lot of applicants from the private sector, because obviously that's the only way that junior doctors can funnel when there are no spaces in the public sector, is that people are used to managing cases either on the ships or in the private sector, in wards and emergency centers, with drugs that we would have never seen in the public sector, but can't follow algorithms that include efficiency, that include utility, that include antibiotic stewardship, that include the basics of clinical diagnosis and rational testing before you get to the complex ordering that you might be doing in the private sector or on the ships. So the ability to have an academic approach to answering a question, to seeing a patient, to giving an answer, thinking in frameworks is extremely important. We're taught how to answer questions for clinical OSCEs in undergraduate, but it's very easy to forget that in the cut and thrust of delivering clinical care, especially in the private sector. So just getting on to the paperwork of an application process, just remembering that I told you, look, it's important to make contact with the clinical departments that you're interested in applying to, whether that's going to happen tomorrow, whether that's going to happen in 5 years' time, and you have a vision for wanting to work and specialize at a specific center. I'm based at Groote Hospital as a medical manager in charge of certain units there. And it's always important to know which is the streamline of talent that we want to call upon, both when we need medical officers on locum duty, when we need people to cover our services, we need people to teach our interns and our students in our different departments, when we need people to research for us and collect data, analyze numbers, assist our registrars to publish. We want to be in contact with those people, and we'd like those people to supply us with paperwork so that when the time comes, when openings are available, we know who we can call upon. Of course, that is a difficult space to be in as a junior doctor, to not be in permanent employment. I'm sure many on the call would be aware of the fact that many people are working as supernumeraries. That can take different forms. You might be doing different shifts as actual clinical shifts for a department, but there are other ways to give into the life of that department. You can teach, you can train, you can research, you can give lectures to undergraduate students. So it's not necessarily something that is going to take away from your time that you need to dedicate to the private sector to actually earn a salary. But it's important to consider how you might have multiple pots on the boil to get you where you need to go. You need to generate the experience, you need to get paid, but you also need to round out your CV. Okay, so just based on the Z83, the Z83 is a very important document. I think the first thing you need to do is make sure you've got the right version of the Z83, and the best thing you can do is go to the National Department of Health, or if you've received an advert from a provincial Department of Health, use the latest version that's come out with that advert. Make sure that you paste the right reference number on, that you note the department that it was advertised in. Obviously, it's not good enough to just say, you must say the Department of Health, the facility that it's located in, the department that it's located in. And if there's a reference number next to an advert, make use of it. In terms of the personal information, obviously, you must complete it appropriately. When it comes down to the demographic options, you do need to know that when filling in your race criteria, we self-identify in the South African public sector, and you're held to what you self-identify. I think the most important thing for people to be aware of is that you cannot change your race. I'm not sure about gender, but you cannot change your race with facility HR, right? And so that's where you would get flagged if that does happen. You can record if you've got a disability. You can record it. You have to record if you're a citizen or not. I think most of the people on the call would be either citizens or permanent residents of the country. There's some play in terms of how citizens are ranked according to their equity status. Permanent residents are at the bottom of equity status, and foreigners are at the bottom below permanent residents as well. Obviously, you do have to have a valid work permit, and you do need to make sure your HPCSA registrations are current. That's extremely important. You need to make sure that you've got the sign-off of your community service documentation. If you're applying for a consultant post, and that's obviously far down the line, you would not be, but I think it's just a case in point, you would not be considered for a post if you had not got your signed off documents from the HPCSA before the date of the interview. Unfortunately, we've had candidates who've had pieces of HPCSA documentation signed the day after an interview, and despite being the highest scoring candidate, was not offered the job offer because their HPCSA information was not up to date, was not provided on the day of the interview, and was not current. And so you have to get on top of your documentation. I learned a very hard lesson about that in community service for not having a signature signed off in internship and not having a paycheck for 6 months because of my HPCSA documentation. In terms of the South African languages, you must be very careful of this as well. In some instances, in some provinces, they will require 2 South African languages proficiency, at least of a medical level, to ensure that you will be shortlisted. And for some positions, you would not be shortlisted if you cannot at least speak or converse medically in 2 languages, at least, and hopefully one of the local languages of your province, as well as English. So be careful of that. In terms of formal qualifications, lay it all out there. You can attach another page if you need more for your qualifications, and then your work experience starting from the most recent job that you've held down. And then your references are very important. If you have a reference, make sure that it's someone of standing, someone who is in hopefully the specialty that you're applying for, and someone who can attest to what you're applying for. Okay, I think that's very important. Because when someone gets a reference check, they're going to be asked to say, okay, what were you good at? What could you improve on? And that's going to go to the panel members. So it's very important to think about who you put down as a reference and to have a caucus with them before you submit their name. In terms of shortlisting in the country, so because we get so many interview applicants, we have to shortlist. And so we will take, so currently we have an interview process for about 5 posts. We are trying to winnow down 400 applicants into a day's worth of interviews. And you can imagine a day's worth of interviews is approximately 10 people that you can give a good effort to. You know, you don't want to invite too many people and then give each person 15 minutes for an interview. We actually have to shortlist. And so in some of the electronic processes you'll find, there are shortlisting questions built into the process. You'll often find these to be quite automatic. You know, are you registered with the HPCSA? Have you completed your community service? Have you done 6 months or 12 months in the specialty that you're applying to, even if it's a medical officer post? On top of that, we might then also ask you to do a multiple choice questionnaire online. We might ask you to deliver a presentation. That would be part of a shortlisting process, but then again, it might be part of an interview. But just to note that you have to be careful with what you're selecting because we are using those answers to shortlist. From that, if we still get a battery of people beyond 20, we're going to give out MCQs. We're going to ask for further steps in the process to get down to at least 10 people that we can interview. If it's more than that, it's going to be a longer period of interviews, and we tend not to like that. Something that a lot of people miss is the fact that there are these things called job descriptions. And I think it's very difficult to know sometimes what's the model answer that an interview panel has when they're trying to assess a candidate. So it's actually the job description that you're applying for. And they're sometimes surprisingly difficult to get a hold of. For every single job in a hospital, in a clinic, there is a job description to go with that. And your performance management as an appointee will be taken directly from the job description. So as far as possible, if you're applying for a medical officer post at a certain facility, try and get your hands on a job description, either from the same province, from a similar facility, or the same facility, because within that job description will be contained your key responsibility areas, right? And so within that job description, you'll have a better understanding of your purpose. So this is my job description as a medical manager. It breaks down my key responsibility areas, the weights of those key responsibility areas, and the standards that I will be held to in delivering my job. Under the standards, it's then obviously great to go and look at what those standards are. For a clinical specialty, they will obviously be referencing the clinical guidelines and the algorithms of the national societies and the universities or the university hospitals that you're applying to. You'd also be able to understand what's the level of competency expected for you at this level in your career. And I say that because a KRA is a key responsibility area. It defines your main duties and it defines your responsibilities. It gives you direction and accountability in your job. And it's the way in which you're assessed in terms of performance management, both as an MO, a registrar, and eventually as a consultant one day. It's going to blend in quite seamlessly with the entrustable professional activities that the specialties are developing as we speak. And so once you understand your key responsibility areas, then you can actually understand why certain questions are being asked of you in an interview. And so the interview is the final stage, right? So you've done your CV, you've got all your registration, all your documents, all of your police certificates are in, you've gone through the shortlisting process. You are the top 10 in a list of candidates that have applied. There's 400 to 500 easily for an interview for a medical job in South Africa these days, right? It's a narrow stalk to get into the registrar programs and the various clinical specialties, and now you need to perform. So as you go through your interview process, just be aware you might get 5 interviews in a standard interview template. You should have at least 3 or 4 people on a panel. So it would be a clinical head of department, a medical manager, another clinician, or someone who is of a higher level than yourself. Nobody junior to you can interview you, as well as a human resources representative. That HR representative is not there to score you, but just to make sure that HR prescripts are followed in your interview. So when we do an interview, you might get 1 or 2 maximum clinical interview questions where you will be asked on your approach to a typical patient that would come into your casualty. You should really think about high volume presentations, typical things that come in on a Friday or a Saturday night in the emergency center, or that get referred to you in a typical subspecialty of your choosing. Think of the high volume cases, the things that occur most commonly, and don't start with the sort of most abstract diagnoses first. You need to have an approach that goes with the most common and that can take you down a diagnostic route to get to what might be a final reason. So I say this because as a public health person who's been on many clinical interviews, I can follow the reasoning up until a point, but they start with as basic a point of saying, you've got a patient with acute renal failure and you're wanting to work them up towards dialysis and XYZ. But the first step in the process is, have you checked if the patient's catheterized? And is that the reason why they've got such poor urine output? So you really need to make sure you've covered the basics, and then you build out on your clinical framework for those kinds of questions, right? You're only going to get 1 or 2 clinical questions. You will definitely get a question on research. What research have you done? What research are you thinking of doing? And more, we're seeing a lot more candidates come through with established research portfolios. I mean, we're doing medical officer interviews and looking at people that have published already and scoring them based on that. Have you published? Have you presented at a conference? Have you done action research? Have you possibly reached out to a potential supervisor for an MMed? Do you have an MMed topic in mind? Okay, if you've got an MMed topic in mind, how would you actually research this topic? Do you know how to write a research protocol? Have you already sent one through HREC? How would you do a literature review? Who are the experts in the field that you would like to work with? Is it a case control, a cohort, or randomized control trial that you're interested in? These aren't things that we tend to think of as junior doctors, but increasingly that's how competitive the process is. Every single person that's going to get into a medical officer come registrar post needs to do an MMed, needs to have an understanding of the research process, and needs to be able to demonstrate that they can finish a full MMed within 18 months. You'll get your 3 years, but in totality, when you get to having a supervisor and running your research after a year being in a registrar program, that's all you really have to do the research. So you really have to come in swinging, and you already have to have the big picture in your head. So what else will we ask? Typically, a multidisciplinary question, a conflict management, a team dynamics question, a self-management question can easily come up. Being junior doctors working on the floor, understanding burnout and wellness, understanding patient complaints and patient safety incidents, understanding how to work with long waiting times for either the emergency center or an emergency waiting theater, or managing patients on a dialysis list for the medical specialists in training, or just managing routine cases. There are points of tension in the system. And as managers and senior clinicians, we want to make sure that we can appoint people who demonstrate a high level of emotional intelligence, right? So that's a very important question. And you must remember that these things are all scored independently and ultimately can differentiate candidates. You might score very well in an interview, but we're expecting you to score very well on clinical questions. But what might end up differentiating you is your research, is your emotional intelligence, is your ability to prove that you can work in a team with other people. Okay, so those are by and large the questions that do get asked. I mean, you can get asked some basic other questions around what other value would you bring to the team, and you need to know yourself. You need to know what your passions are and where you see your future lying. Obviously, clinical specialties love to hear that you'd love to specialize in their program. In terms of selling yourself, I think it's something that people find quite difficult in interviews, especially medical doctors. We're far more used to interviewing patients and asking them dry questions, and we're not used to putting ourselves out there. And don't be lulled into a false sense of security because you've gotten that interview. Previously, getting that interview meant getting the job. These days, as I said, you're 1 of 10, and all 10 of those people will be highly competitive. And you must remember, do not assume that the panel knows what you're saying. You have to lay it out for them. They're not going to go through your CV. You need to be detailed in your answers. If you know the answer, say so. If you've got a framework approach to answering a question, either clinical or non-clinical, give the framework and then populate the framework so that we can see that you're thinking according to a structured way and hopefully according to an academic way. Either from a national society or a university. Yeah, and I think be confident, be calm. Also take the opportunity to write yourself notes if you need to. When you get asked a question, always think back to, if I've got a job description, if I've seen the key responsibility areas for this post that I'm interviewing, I've just received this question. In what key responsibility area does this fall? What are the standards that I'm going to be measured by according to what I'm looking at the interviewees writing down? And then make notes for yourself. I'm in key responsibility area 1, clinical service delivery. Under organ transplantation, it might be workup of patients for lung transplants. What are the standards I'm being held to? What are the algorithms used to work up patients? Which are the ones that I'm going to reference? And then I'm going to give detail under each of the algorithms I know. So you need to have that kind of approach. So I think I've gone on, and I think we've covered quite a bit there. Excuse the Western Cape slides. We do work for a specific province in the Department of Health, but these interview tips should stand you in good stead across the country, across all points in your career, but especially for you guys as junior doctors with the selection pressures that you're dealing with and the terrific work that I know you guys are doing. I hope that I've helped in some way to progress your careers. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Dr. Peters, for your lovely words and words of encouragement. I think going into the job spectrum is very, very different and difficult, and you just have to kind of market yourself quite well and be ready for any type of question that they have. And thank you so much for the tips and tricks on kind of how to prepare for these things. I really, really appreciate your time.
Pleasure.
Next, on the list, it's going to be I'm going to try to keep it as quick as possible. It will be me speaking. My name is Janke Mens. I am currently a 1-year post-comserve junior doctor. I studied at the University of Pretoria, did my undergrad there, did my internship at Baragwanath Hospital for 2 years, and then ended up in rural Free State for my comserve, my community service, at an unaccredited facility where I just kind of just learn the basics and just fall into the deep end. And I really, really enjoyed it and for what it was worth. And I am grateful for the opportunities and everything that I learned there, more about myself, about medical care, and about just doing the best for the patient and the community. I am going to talk specifically about securing a job in the private sector. As I'm currently employed in the private sector on a permanent basis, I also struggle to get a job, as most people will be doing, and it's a bit of a reality that we need to face. I was unemployed for about 3 to 4 months in the beginning of 2025. Not for a lack of trying. I think I applied for 12 posts per day within private and public from the middle of January, and just never got an interview, never got kind of those things, but I think I need to work on my CV and get those courses ready. So that is also the plan now, to do that properly and to market myself a bit better for future posts. As of middle April this year, I got a permanent post at a very busy net care emergency department. So I work there most days, and I'm working at about 40 to 60 hours per week there. And on the side, I'm doing a bit of GP locuming and getting a diploma here and there, doing the courses, keeping my courses up to date, going into research, all of those things, just to kind of build my career and see where I'm going. So it's a bit an undifferentiated post currently, but I'm enjoying learning a lot in private and just the admin behind it as well. And it's a completely different ball game to the public sector, where I'm used to doing my training. So I'm just going to go about how to secure a job as a general practitioner within the private sector. The first thing we can talk about is the various options. So if you listen to our webinar last week, we actually discussed a lot about the various options within the private sector. You can become post-comserve, you can work as a general practitioner, you can either join a practice, buy in a practice, GP practice, or just do locuming shifts and get paid on a commission based. You can work in an emergency department as a medical officer, which I'm currently doing, various emergency departments. You can work for HEMS, which is the transporting, which is either Netcare 911 or, no, I can't remember the other one. Or you can do surgical assisting. And then you can work for various funds like SASA grant, roadside assistant fund, WCA, Workmen's Compensation Act. You can be an advisor for medical aids. You can, you can work on cruise lines, but all of this was discussed last week in the webinar. I'm going to go into, firstly, how do you find these jobs in private sector? The first thing you have to do is Google. Within your area where you live in, you must Google or know GPs within your area or within the country, depending on how far you are going to search for a job, to look for any permanent buy-in or a permanent post, a permanent locum, or just work as a locum. You can look for various emergency departments looking for medical officers or locums on a permanent basis. You can go through agencies. One of the biggest agencies in South Africa is something like ER Consulting. So ER Consulting is about 24, 25 emergency departments within South Africa that they run. So if you apply for ER Consulting as a locum or on a permanent basis, and go through the interview process. They usually have a test as well, and you go through the interview process. I, for one, was a locum for Dr. Nay and Piccolo Inc. or EDMG in the beginning of the year. Also, I locumed a bit for them. Also went through the interview process and worked in their they have 5 emergency departments in Gauteng that I worked for. And finally, I reached out to a privately run emergency department where I'm currently working at. They're not part of a locum agency. And I went through the interview process, did a few shadowing shifts, and then got the permanent contract. So you can also Google anything else that needs an NBCHB. That's like the road accident fund, the SASA grants. You can work for medical aids as a quality surveyor, or there's quite a few things that you can Google. The other thing is Facebook groups, WhatsApp groups, or LinkedIn. Facebook groups are going to be quite busy. There's 2 big Facebook groups that I think you could join or you should join. In the South African Medical Posts Facebook group or Medical Internship South Africa Facebook group. This is kind of where lots of the posts are advertised, and people are looking for locums, people are looking for jobs in private, and I would definitely recommend that you just keep those groups up in your periphery the whole time. WhatsApp groups as well. I remember when the unemployment crisis in the beginning of the year was quite significant. It still is, but in the beginning of the year we had quite various WhatsApp groups that were started within a province. So like I'm currently, I think, part of 3 or 4 unemployment groups within South Africa, and they posts there, locums needed. If they need a surgical assistant very, very quickly, they might post it on that group, and it's first come, first serve. And that's kind of how you just keep up to date with the posts that are available. And then, of course, LinkedIn. LinkedIn basically is your online CV. You must open a profile on LinkedIn, make sure that it correlates with your CV quite well, update it with your courses, update it with where you are currently in your life, where you are living, make yourself open to work, and the jobs will kind of tend to be not find you necessarily, but will come up as a notification. The companies that do the Ireland transfers will also definitely contact you very, very quickly. So just take that into consideration, and just open your LinkedIn profile and check that every single day for a post. Then word of mouth is very, very important in the private sector. I think these types of days, even now in the public sector, it's not necessarily about who you know. It's not necessarily about what you know. It's about who you know, how you get the post, how you get the interview. And especially in private sector, it is kind of word of mouth about getting the post and being yeah, just approach for the interview. For example, my where I do GP locum training, or like where I do GP locum work, it is actually my parents' house doctor that's been their doctor for a few years, and I just approached her and I said, listen, I'm desperate for a job. Are you available for any locum buy-in or allocation? And she said yes. So because she knows me, and she knows my parents and she knows my family, and that kind of helped. So word of mouth is very, very important there. So if you do have a permanent post and you hear of another post that a friend of yours is looking to advertise, or a locum that's looking for a job, don't recommend your friends. This is how you know your friends, you know what they're capable of, and this is how we help each other as well, to just kind of get a post in private. And then lastly, also going to hospitals and introducing yourself. I have a colleague that really, really wanted to assist, so to do surgical assisting. And he actually went out to about 80 plus specialists within the Gauteng area. He went into their lunch breaks, or he went to go see them during their lunch breaks, introduced himself, gave his CV, kind of get a rapport with the surgeon, and just say, listen, I'm open for surgical assisting. Please, if you have anything available, please think of me. That's kind of how you just have to be a bit irritating and be a bit, market yourself quite good. And then finally, in the private sector, unfortunately, nepotism is your friend. That's why word of mouth and knowing someone who knows someone who knows someone to kind of get a job will definitely count in your favor. So always during internship, during ComServe, during your studies, always build up contacts and network, and know that you're relay back to your references that you actually have, and ask them if they have anybody that's available for a post, or anybody that has a post for you. And that's kind of how you can kind of secure a job in private sector these days in such a saturated market. Then on CV tips, it is definitely keep it short and sweet. Nobody likes reading through a six-page CV. Keep it short and sweet, and keep it dedicated to the post that you want, goal-orientated. If you want to post in emergency department, make sure all the courses and everything correlates with that. If you want a post in transport or at SASSA grant or anything like that, you have to make it goal-directed for that post. Your contact details is very important and must be relevant and available. They will contact you via email very quickly. I think the rejection letters come quicker than in the public sector, so just be prepared for that. And but at least the communication is there, and you can actually move on quite quickly to a next post. So the sections that I had in my CV is firstly the contact details, your objective, your education, whereas school, tertiary, and the courses or the CMSA diplomas or primaries that you've done, leadership experience, work experience, any skills. Language is very important as well as the Z83, but you won't fill in the Z83 for private posts, just an example. And then computer skills is actually quite important, especially in private now, because most private-based and public-based, but private-based hospitals and GPs are actually moving towards an online system. So if you are competent with a computer and you're competent with an iPad, or just like general system working, it actually counts in your favor, as most of these things will be, admin will be online. For example, where I'm working currently is in a very, very busy Netcare hospital. So they use Care On, and it is, most days it's user friendly, but sometimes you have to think a bit, and I really rely on my computer skills to manage it so much better, and to be able to do the notes as efficient and quickly as possible. And then this is also where ChatGPT or Heidi or anything like that can also come into play, but that is a discussion for another day. AI is definitely assisting there with online notes and making it as efficient as possible. Personal interests, and then driving. Just say which license code you have and how many years experience you have. They kind of like if you are able to drive yourself to work, to and from work, that's kind of there. And if you are available for a locum post, if you are able to drive to that emergency department that might be far from home. any achievements, and then references. So references needs to be up to date, and as Dr. Peters says, it has to be orientated or allocated or whatever to the post that you have. If you work for if you want to work for an emergency department, rather have emergency department physicians or your ComServe doctors or somebody as your reference, where you worked in a casualty setting, to vouch for you how hard you worked in a casualty. If you work for the transport, if you want to apply for a transport system or transport work, rather have like a paramedic that worked with you alongside you for all of your hours that you do. So yeah, that just is important. This is just an example of my exact CV, the objective part. So just a quick intro. This is like the cliff notes of who I am as a person. This was where I applied for a GP practice. And I actually got the post like this, with this is my objective. So the most important thing is that thus currently I am a registered independent practitioner. Your MP number will also be somewhere in your CV. And then I'm doing this because I want to work in a family-oriented GP practice, something like that. So just have a small introduction to who you are as a person and why you're actually applying for this post. Then the important documents to have for when applying for a post in private is a recent photo. These are things that if you especially apply through email or yeah, just an online application, they do want to see how you look. A recent photo, a copy of your ID, an updated CV or a goal-oriented CV, your MBCHB degree certificates, preferably a copy of the original one, your independent practitioner registration, so the thing with your MP number, and alongside that also your HPCSA good standing document, just saying that you're up to date with all your payments and you're up to date, you're actually registered as an independent practitioner right now. Any CMSA or College of Medicines of South Africa primaries or diplomas that you've obtained before, the copies or the certificates of that, all your courses, BLS, ACLS, ATLS, ICU, EPOCUS, all of the courses that you've done needs to be, you have to have those documents proving that you've done those courses. CPD compliance document is also quite important. That's something you can get very easily off the HPCSA online services and ensure that you're always CPD compliant. And then lastly, your medical indemnity insurance proof. So this is something extra that needs to happen, needs to be in private. Oh, not private, needs to be, when you work in the private sector, you have to have medical indemnity insurance. There's quite a few. We also talked a bit about it last week on the webinar, but this is very important. This is the thing that will keep you safe and keep you out of court. There's various options, various companies for a good reason. They're very, very competitive amongst each other. But this is where you just need to do your own research. And usually the job that you're applying for, especially if it's a locum agency or a big emergency department, they actually have a preference as to which company they prefer you to use due to them burning their fingers or yeah, just burning their fingers or something that they're not happy with this one company that they're more moved towards another company. So just ask them with the doctors that work there, which company or which indemnity insurance they have they recommend and why. So, and how much you need to be covered for and all of those things. So that's something that you just need to speak to them about so that you are on par and that you are, that they are satisfied with your indemnity insurance. So interview tips. The nice thing about private interviews, it is not so stressful, I think, as public. So the first thing you have to do is just be yourself and let your CV do the talking. You've done the necessary courses, you've done the necessary 3-year training, internship and ComServe, and now you're ready to enter the job market fully. So most of the interviews it is clinically based, but it is more based on the vibe and the rapport that you have with the person that you're interviewing with, which is usually the general practitioner running the agency or running the locum or the locum post or something like that. It's not so research based. It's not I don't think it's not so intense, but it is more about how you will be a benefit or an asset to this company. Private is a business, so always keep that in mind, and they are putting a lot of time and effort into you as as a new employee. So just make sure that that correlates with your interview. Like, how can you be an asset to this business? And how do you, it's not always, yeah, I'll go on now. Okay. So various questions that have been asked. I've been for about 4 private facilities interviews. The first thing that they kind of ask is, why are you seeking a job in the private sector? Mostly the answer is because you're not getting a job in the public sector, or you want to open your own practice, or you want to enter the private sector just for a bit of job security. There's lots of reasons. They also ask, what is your 5-year plan? Because they are investing in you. So they want to see, like, is it worth the investment, or are you going to leave after 6 months if you get a better post? Things like that. Clinical question, honestly, depends on where you interview. For a locum post or GP locum post, you generally don't get asked clinical questions, but for an emergency department post, you will get asked clinical questions. Certain things, as Dr. Peters also said, like proper common things that you'll see on a Friday night, how to manage. For example, I think I got like ECG, and it was a STEMI, and they asked, how would you manage this STEMI, and how would you manage this patient? And then it's literally like protocol based, and have a proper formulation to actually answer that question in a high stress setting. How would you actually assist this patient within a framework, and to have everything ready? They generally ask about conflict management. So they would ask, like, in the last 3 years of your training, what conflict did occur, or difficult or stressful thing occurred for you, and how did you manage that? How did you get past it? How did you get through it? And just advice, general advice. So yeah, some small things. So I think something, for example, like something difficult that happened during my ComServe year is our hospital burnt down, and it actually closed. The hospital where I worked at burnt down, and we had to move all the facilities to a different facility. And that was kind of something that just, how do you get over that? How do you work with new facility managers? How do you just change your whole life, uproot your whole life in the middle of the year, and kind of just change everything? That was like a big thing that they just asked about, and how did you manage that? And then if you have a good vibe, if you give up a good vibe, they might invite you for a practice shift. And usually if you get invited for the practice shift, the contract follows quite quickly. So the practice shift is not there to test your clinical skills. It's there to see if you manage with the admin. It's there to see if you manage with the online systems that there maybe is. And just if you have a good rapport with patients, and just again to confirm that your clinical or holistic approach is there, and that you will be a good asset for the business. So private sector contracts, when you get that contract, read through it thoroughly before committing. You ask around in that area if the salary or the commission that they are offering you is sustainable and fair. We've seen a lot of people that get approached by hocus pocus locum agencies. You work for them, you're actually contracted to work, and you go out and you do work in a GP practice, and you never see the money for a year or 2 years later. So make sure that there's a contract always involved, something that backs you and backs the business to actually pay you, and that it's a fair amount that they pay. You ask around, what is the general fee? For example, most GPs these days in Gauteng, for example, ask like 650 to 740 Rand per consultation. So if you are only getting 100 Rand per patient, that's not fair, because you are seeing this patient properly. So kind of just take it with a pinch of salt and work out in that area how much is fair. So if you plan on moving along very quickly from a private post, let's say overseas, or to public, if you manage to secure a post in public or overseas, you must read the resignation clauses very well. Do you need to buy yourself out of the contract? Do you have to work for 6 months before you give notice? Things like that is very, very important. So yeah, something, I have a very weird clause in my contract that not weird, but it's understandable that I like, if I resign, I cannot work in this area for about at least 6 months afterwards. And there's a reason behind it. They don't want you to go to the competition. They don't want you to just leave this job. They'd rather want you to sort out the issue within the company and stay as an investment into the business. And then always remember, if the offer sounds too good to be true, it's probably not true. So these locum agencies, just go to the Facebook groups, ask, like, have you been approached by this locum agency, and are they legit? You'll see a lot of reviews and reports already made by people on these Facebook groups saying to stay away or to go ahead with the contract. Just do your research properly before signing that contract. So tips about entering the private sector in general from a public background. It's a learning curve, exponential learning curve. It's overwhelming at some point because the medication and everything is quite different. So always say yes to seeing a medicine rep. The medicines in private is completely different to the public sector. So you have to learn the new combinations and the names quite quickly. The reps are there to help you, and they should never become tedious. They bring their product and you learn the new combinations, the cheaper version. All of those things is very important for your patient care that's actually paying to see you. Then the apps that has helped me as an emergency department medical officer in private. So EM Guidance is quite helpful, up to date if you can afford that subscription, or if your hospital where you work at actually has an up-to-date part or subscription. Very, very helpful. And then varsity textbooks are quite helpful. Those things, there's two quite nice ones. So the first one is this one. I can't see it quite nicely. Let me see. So this is Prof. Kluk's, the Wits emergency department book. And then Tikkies also has one that I use every single day, or I take it to work and I use as reference. In private, you have to know ICD-10 coding and PMB coding quite well, and the difference between an ICD-10 code and a PMB ICD-10 code. This will help with medical authorization. It will help with billing and medical aids. And honestly, that's usually the hospitals where you work at do actually have an app or something that helps you understand what is the difference between an ICD-10 code and a PMB. It is, as you go along, you'll actually start learning the ICD-10 codes very well and knowing exactly which ones work and which ones don't for medical aid authorizations. And there's a reason behind why some of the authorizations don't go through. So if you learn these two things quite well, you will not have a struggle to actually assist the patient with a payout or admission. I also use MedCalc quite often. MedCalc is very, very helpful with fluid management, with pediatrics management, just working general calculations. And it also helps with the certain protocols and things that we can, you can see if you need to admit the patient, or usually in the emergency department, you just put the certain protocol through, like it's a Weber B classification, so it has to be operated on or whatever in terms of ankle fracture and things like that. So that's it actually quite helps you a lot to expedite the patient's care with a specialist. So CPR metronome is also quite helpful, but I'm sure you've had it now for internship or ComServe. Luckily within a private sector, usually you have a bit of a timekeeper helping with that you don't have to have a metronome. And I'm also lucky enough to work in a private facility where we actually have a core pulse. So it's a machine that does CPR for us. So it's very, very easy to delegate and to actually be with the airway and be, have like a proper good team response, and don't have to worry about losing your breath doing CPR. But that's where metronome is quite helpful. PediHelp is also a very important app. Just helps you with all those pediatric dosages. So care notes, or your hospital policies or protocols. In Netcare, we have care notes, and that's something that you can print out and actually give to a patient on like a concussion protocol or a neck injury protocol, just things to look out for and when to come back. And And then you have AfriTox. So AfriTox is run by the South African Poison Control. And unfortunately, after USAID was taken out of our country, the after-hours services of the Poison Control actually, it doesn't exist anymore, as that was paid for by the USAID. So after hours, the Poison Control is not available. So that's where AfriTox comes in. It gives all the wonderful drugs that your patients might overdose on or be exposed to, and what type of things you have to look out for in terms of management for this patient further. And then obviously call the poison control during the day, during the weekday, if the patient comes in at that time, and get proper advice from a pharmacist. And they're very, very good with their jobs there. And then NMC reporting is also quite helpful. NMC reporting is for the non-communicable diseases like measles or a dog bite. And that's something that you'll have to do as a GP. You'll have to report it yourself within your area. But I'm sure you've used it in COMSA. We used to use it in community service quite often, that we had to report patients with measles and those type of things. Very easy app to download and to get involved within your facility. And then WhatsApp groups. WhatsApp groups will really, really help you. I'm on quite a few. So there's a GP dermatology group, there's a GP chats groups, that is the NSA is the National Snakebite group, the pediatric infection diseases, primaries and diploma groups, just like-minded colleagues where you can ask any type of question and hopefully get an helpful approach or a helpful message to just advise you on how to manage this patient further. I know for a fact, like the GP dermatology group is very, very nice. You send photos of a weird rash or a weird thing that happens on a patient's skin, and you get actually answers from a dermatologist. As in our country currently, it does take about 6 months to a year waiting list to actually see a dermatologist in private, not to mention in public. It does take even longer. So this is actually just quick help to actually help the patient immediately that's sitting in front of you, and try and get them to the dermatology appointment a few months' time as a kind of healed patient with the correct creams and correct everything. So that's just very helpful. So if you set up a GP practice or work within a GP practice, you'd have to get to know the specialists around you. Speak to the doctors that have been working there for a few years or a few months, and ask them which specialist they prefer and why, and kind of build up a relationship with the specialist like that, and hear feedback from the patients as to the specialist that they went to, how it was. And yeah, the private sector, again, is just mostly about who you know, not what you know. So make sure that you know the right people to help you and your patient. So last slide, I promise. So these are, I actually made a comment on one of those Facebook groups. Someone asked, like, they are very overwhelmed to go into the private sector. Please give us tips and tricks. And this was exactly my comment. After being working in a private emergency department and private locum shifts in a GP for the last 8 months, 6, 7 or 8 months. These are things that I had to learn the hard way in private, that I was kind of blind to before I started working within the area. So the first thing is that private healthcare is a business at its core. Your patients, especially P3s, are paying clients as well. So there must always be an element of time is money in your approach, unfortunately. And in no ways does this mean that you have a decreased level of care compared to any other more ill patients. It just helps you to understand those difficult patients that take photos of you and put them on Facebook and things like that, and Google review. So you see the patients as quick as possible, as thorough as possible. You make relevant notes, and you try and expedite the patient's disposition as quick as possible. There's only a few outcomes that can happen when you see a patient. So you either transfer, you discharge, or you admit. So this is just a viewpoint that you have to change your mindset about a bit. In any emergency department or GP facility, just remember that you are not there to diagnose 100% accurately. You are there to stabilize and then to transfer or discharge. You have limited tests due to waiting periods. or money or anything like that. You have limited time with the patient, so you don't have to worry too much about getting the specific diagnosis. Just help the patient and then refer to specialists, because that's where specialists come in and actually properly diagnose the patient and stabilize them. You are just there to stabilize initially. And then ICD-10 codes are very, very important. I have gone through with that. Within emergency department, within HEMS or transport, within a GP practice, the nursing staff and the admin personnel that have been working there for a few years are to be respected, always. They are running the floor while you are running around. So you listen and you learn about what experiences they've had. They know a lot more than you do, and especially about admin and expediting a patient, so a patient's care. So yeah, just take that into consideration. So for the first few months, I had a bit of a log of common presentations that I saw, the stats that I gave, the TTO that was given, and that's kind of how you can learn the private sector medication quite well, and what worked and what didn't work for the patient's pain or for the patient's presentation. And that's kind of how you can and speak to your colleagues about it as well, what they would rather give in this scenario. So your senior is your friend. It might be the GP that you work for. It might be just the senior on the floor that's doing your shadowing shifts with you. Rather call them and ask than do something and need to be called in afterwards, or be having to involve your medical indemnity insurance. They are there to help, so use them. You must know your hospital protocols quite well, because that's the thing that in the end will assist you in court or assist you with patient care. So just know the protocols very well, and in terms of ATLS, ACLS, anaphylaxis, all of those things, just know it's usually quite readily available to just go through them. In terms of ethics as well, ethical protocols are very important. Yeah, so just know them quite well. You usually will get them assigned with you'll get them in the same email as your contract. And then you must attend all your CMA hours or your CPD hours, any M&Ms that you might be involved with. It's just a great way to learn about patient care in general. And then don't be afraid to ask questions. The learning curve in private is exponential, but it is quite exciting. The confidence you will build is immense. The contacts you will build is immense. The networking is quite amazing. And I am excited to see what happens with my career for the rest of the path. And yeah, it's just a stepping stone into the next thing that happens in my career. So yeah, don't just see private as something like that. Yeah, thank you so much. I see there is a few questions, or not. Is there anybody have a question?
No open questions, Dr. Mains.
Okay, then thank you so much for your time, everybody. This webinar will be available on YouTube afterwards. Really appreciate Dr. Peters also for speaking. If you have any questions, feel free to Instagram us on the Jodasa Instagram. Email us. You can welcome to comment on this video as well on YouTube, and we will answer it as quick as possible. And yeah, thank you so much for your time. We do have one more webinar in this series, Life After ComServe. It will most likely be next week. We're still organizing a bit, but the next step is kind of, the next approach is going to be, you're facing unemployment, how to get over that emotionally and physically and financially. So it's just going to be steps to take to actually assist with that and just be emotionally sane as you go into this unemployment thing that is unfortunately a reality. And yeah, just look out for the next webinar that we will be having. Thank you so much for your time.